So welcome everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you back to this week's 3 at 3. As you will have gathered, Angela isn't joining us for the next few weeks. She has other things in hand, but I'm delighted to be joined by Al Morris, one of Angela's colleagues, and also Joe McCallum, a good friend of mine, who's the Chief Experience Officer of Idisrup Digital. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Hello.
So the topic this week we are going to look at is culture change. It's an increasingly important aspect of digital transformation and the challenges that we're all going to face as we come out of our post-lockdown and try and figure out what this new normal is that we're all trying to adopt and come into. And so I'm going to ask Al to ask Joe the first question. Al.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, so I was wondering, in regards to sort of digital technology and transformations, why do so many of them fail?
It's a really good question, and I think that there are probably individually lots of reasons that they fail, by organisational type and size and infrastructure. But I guess across the businesses that I've worked with, there are definitely some common themes. The top one is often around sort of senior management, senior leadership commitment. So I guess the only thing that anybody could predict about a technology or digital transformation program is that people will fail, mistakes will be made, and actually the most successful transformations have failure at the heart of them. It's the concept of failing fast but learning quickly is the mindset change that senior leaders have to evolve into. But if you're not committed to that, because that actually feels really difficult when you're in the midst of it, particularly if you are a behavioural type that, sees personal failures as weakness, or you're potentially concerned about how you might be perceived because of those failures. So that senior commitment to, this road might be uncertain, but the one thing that is certain is that it will be bumpy, and we're not necessarily going to withdraw investment at the first bump that we meet. Yeah. And we're not going to hold individuals to task for the mistakes that they make, rather than understanding why something hasn't worked and adapting and evolving into a culture where pivoting into something that's more successful because you've learned from that mistake is actually what you're going to deem to be most successful. So that commitment, that senior management commitment at the very beginning, in terms of what is it that we're trying to achieve and that it is going to be difficult as we go through it, I think would be one reason that I've seen things not work. So when your CEOs, your MDs, your general managers pull out too quickly rather than kind of staying on course, I think would be a big one. Probably still on that theme of kind of feeling fast is not adopting kind of an agile and sprint culture in terms of how you're managing your transformation. Whether or not that's a technology transformation or a wider kind of business orientated change program, I would really advocate that kind of harnessing agile for all the best outputs that you get from it is something that will set you up well. So that iterative process, that pivoting when something's not quite right, the self-organized teams, people really understanding the part that they play in the process, it makes this chaotic period for businesses much easier. But if you're going to, again, back to that commitment at the beginning, if you're going to try and go through it in a step-by-step fashion, thinking that everything will naturally fall out of it, classic waterfall, we do one thing and then this happens. That's, again, that I think that is a kind of one of the paramount failures that I've seen. And then I think probably the last bit encompasses everything that I said in the last two. It's ultimately about your culture. So, fast-paced, rapid change, seeing beyond potentially your transformation being wider than the tools, the tech stack, is really important. And leaders have such a huge responsibility to play their part, I think. And when I talk about cultural transformation, I mean the mindset change. I think I refer to that in the first couple of points, that's really required at the top. And that, you know, sort of filters its way down throughout the organisation. This is something that just doesn't work if you try and go bottom up. And yeah, so I think understanding where culture is at the beginning of your transformation and having a vision and a purpose for how you want to describe what it's going to feel like at the end of it is really important before you put pen to paper and start talking about strategy and tactics, because that's often what people expect, you know, senior leaders to be talking about when we refer to these big change programs. But often it's the last thing that you know, your employees and your individuals really want to hear about.
Yeah, it's interesting because my very first boss when I first started working was a lady called Morgan Kennedy. And I remember I was like a 23-year-old straight out of uni, first proper job, about $5 a year or whatever I was getting paid. And I remember saying to me, don't worry about making mistakes, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. Just don't make the same mistake twice. And that was like the early 80s. Morgan was way ahead of her time. And I've taken that lesson right across my career, but also into my teams as well. You know, I want my teams to be pushing hard. I want them to be making mistakes and learning from it. It's ultimately how you learn to do everything when you're a child. You make mistakes, you go, oh, I'm not going to do that again because it hurt, whether it's falling over or trying to jump off something. And so, but it's a cultural thing, isn't it? You're so right, Joe. And the leaders have to own that space and be comfortable and confident in themselves, that they will allow their team to make mistakes, but ultimately be responsible for those mistakes. So, and it's very uncomfortable.
You know, and I think that it can't be underestimated. I think, in my experience, people hear culture, they think fluffy, you know, they think soft, they think HR. They don't necessarily, you know, genuinely attribute commercial value to it. And that's, you know, I guess, back to at the beginning of these change programs, I really advise my clients to think about what measures of success they're going to put behind those cultural elements of their transformation program.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you can be in it, you know, you can be in treacle, you can be in mud, and you can be stuck. You don't really know why you are where you are in it. So it's so true. I also think, you know, that you know, analogy of this embracing failure and being comfortable with it, if you look at things like marketing, you know, marketing is at the heart of pretty much every business. You know, it's tech plus marketing, add in your customers and you get your result ultimately. But if I think back to my early days thinking about a career in marketing, it was all about, you know, out of home, above the fold, high value advertising programs across various different forms of media. You know, that my background's FMCG, so that was ultimately what marketing did. You know, fast forward into 2020 and your marketing tech stack is as important as any other one. Is kind of the first thing. But the way that, you know, the kind of the cultural mindset change for marketeers has evolved into, well, actually, I'm not necessarily always going to go for that big TV campaign or hemorrhage a budget on this, you know, paid channel activity. I'm going to break that down into almost kind of data science-led iterative digital marketing campaigns.
And I mean, it's the iterative piece, isn't it?
It's iterative. It's being able to pivot in the middle of that kind of piece of activation and go, this isn't working, or it is working, and so therefore I'm now going to you know, extrapolate it and take it much wider. And you've got to be able to move at pace and be really naturally curious. And the only way that you get there, and I'm just using digital marketing an example of it because it's such a good one, if you have teams that are not frightened to make the mistakes, to allow them to pivot and move forward. And so I think it's so important. Yeah,
and it's and that whole kind of agile infrastructure of kind of that retro kind of culture of, we will do it for a period of time, and it can be a day, a week, a fortnight, however long you want to set your sprint length. But at the end of it, you go back and you say, right, what was good, what was bad, and what was indifferent. It's the whole stop, start, continue piece, isn't it? You know, what are we now going to stop doing? What are we going to start doing? And if this worked, what are we going to continue to do? And it's building that in as the building block of how you take it forward, which is.
Would you say then? I was basically just going to say, obviously, from what's been said here, and my initial question being, why do so many of these transformation projects fail? Should the question more be, what actually is failure? Because if part of that transformation is to fail, then what is a failure? Is it not learning? Is it just kind of saying, oh, that didn't work, okay, let's move away from it? Or at what point do we say that's failure?
Because I think you're exactly right. I think it fails because the leadership don't have the courage of their convictions to say, well, that didn't work, but we still need to do what we need to do. So let's not do it that way. Let's try something else. And instead they just go, stop the bus.
Yeah. I totally concur. You know, a lot of transformation programs will say, well, we deployed that migration, or we've embraced that new CRM. So therefore our transformation's been successful. Yet nothing's different. So customers aren't more centered. Commercial outputs are usually lower because you've invested through it in your CRM or whatever your bit of software is, but nothing's any different. And often after something like that, your employees are fatigued out the back of it, so you're less productive. So you've invested this huge capital value, but nothing's changed. That would ultimately be, for me, an unsuccessful digital transformation, because the overarching measure of success isn't necessarily being delivered in the way that you thought that it would.
See, it's another reason, just the conversation we're having, we're going to go slightly off a tangent, but I think it's really valid about why they fail is because of the culture and the mindset. It's one of the reasons I have a fundamental issue with the word transformation when you add it to digital. And I always, and Al, I know you've heard me wax lyrical about this, I'm sure Joe has as well.
I know it's coming.
It's why I use the word evolution. It's an evolutionary process. It's small incremental steps and changes which make the big evolution, and it's an ongoing process. And I still have yet to hear anybody explain to me why the word transformation works better than evolution. Because, and for me, you've got to set the mindset up and the expectations up in that evolutionary mindset, not a transformational mindset, because otherwise they're expecting the big bullet, the silver bullet, the big thing that's going to change everything. And the reality is it's lots of small things pulled together over a long period of time that will take you from where you are to where you want to be, which neatly segues into our second question, which is, so what we tend to propose to clients, and I know, Joe, you're the same as we are at This Is Milk and with One Pill, is it tends to be quite an aggressive change program. I think technology and the speed of change drives that aggression. So in your experience, how do you deliver that kind of quite aggressive change program without, as a manager or as a senior team, being aggressive?
So I think that is so valid now as well, that question, because I think we'll all be aware that a post-pandemic marketplace means that the ante is upped across the board. So budgets are squeezed, potentially kind of change milestones that you hoped to fit into a particular window on your overall roadmap might have been missed because actually you were pivoting to survive rather than to grow for the last 3-6 months, whatever it might be. And so when things, which inevitably we're all optimistic they will, start to meander back to a more familiar path, that path's just got 10 times busier than it was in March. So so I think even your average aggressive change program is going to find a moment in the future where things just get even louder in terms of what's expected to be delivered. So I think it's a really good thing to chat about. Personally, what I have found in my experience works really well here is when I've read this quote somewhere, and I would say where if I could remember, but it stayed with me over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. It was so powerful when I read it, and it really spoke to me. It says something along the lines of, most successful cultural transformations don't view their employees as being a means to the ends. They understand they are the ends. So your employees are not there to take you somewhere. They have to understand that they're part of whatever it is that you're talking about. Yeah. So I'll use that CRM example again. If you bring a group together and you talk to them about your future, change roadmap, whatever area or channel of your business, whether that's all encompassing or one particular area. You talk to them about the successful delivery of a CRM system, or you talk to them about a number, a financial goal, whatever it might be. When things get tough, when shit hits the fan over the next few months, that's not going to take these people with you. You've got to start with purpose and vision. In my experience, talking to individuals about the role that they'll play in something, and how critical that part, whether that's a small part or a really substantial part of the overall story, is when you engage hearts and minds. And I found when hearts and minds are really seriously engaged, then those busy, aggressive change roadmaps, if the blame culture is not there, if failure is embraced as well as you move through it, people are energized by it, and discretionary effort becomes something that you don't need to ask for. It's discretionary. People are doing it because they really want to be the end, not the means to the end, the actual end.
So relevant to a piece of work that we're doing at the moment with a really big organization, and that whole thing around purpose and vision. You've got to lay that out. You've got to get the buy-in from your team, and then you're right, as soon as they understand, it's that classic example of NASA when whichever president it was went to the janitor and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm putting a man on the moon." And there he was sweeping the floor. It's that classic. It's a cliche for a reason. It's a cliche because it's a flipping good way of thinking about it. And that's exactly it. Purpose and vision. Once you get that aligned and everybody knows what it is, everything else, it doesn't make it easy, but it makes it easier to get everybody aligned behind it. And it's so important.
I would always say that's my personal opinion, but generally I would find there's a misconception on what a culture is or what a culture should be, especially from a recruitment point of view, or from somebody coming into an organization where the culture is very much sort of hyped up to be Pizza Fridays and one day off to bring your dog into work or something. Bring that is what an amazing culture that organization has, and you can get a pizza on a Friday and you can sit and have a beer.
Kind of a shoot in the office, a shoot taking me from floor 3 to 0, that would be fab.
That's pure, that's 100% best culture. That's kind of, but again, from my experience and the culture we have within our organization, again, it's to go back to that failure and for everybody to, if you learn something, to pass that information on to the next person, and for everybody to grow up. And that example, Steve, the man sweeping the floor, if that's part of it. It's everybody working together to move forward, because at the end it's going to change. It's not pizza. If all you're looking forward to is your pizza on a Friday, that doesn't take you where you need to be going. And
it's so true, Al, because I think that organisations that I've worked with before, will say, but we really invest into our employee value proposition. We've got dress down Fridays, we do, summer balls or whatever it might be. But
it's great. It's fun,
which is great, absolutely. Yeah. But our EVP score comes back in our climate survey and it's notoriously low. What are we doing wrong? And then you go into a business and you sit and you observe, maybe do some, observed sort of one-to-one or coaching sessions, and you realise that the micro conversations are diluting the impact of the formal stuff. Yeah. So the conversations that are happening either via email at 11:30 at night, where sent, meant, received is lost. So, God, that my boss didn't say, "Hi, how are you?" at the beginning of that email. So clearly I've done something wrong. That to either the micro conversations not being particularly sophisticated in how they're delivered, or not there at all, are the things that I think dilute that impact. And again, I've had clients say to me, right, so I want to do a leadership program. So, what should I be training? And it's like, well, there's not a one size fits all answer to this. Your leaders have got to be naturally curious about their people, and that's. I want to find out what's going
to be a part of their lives.
Yep, we can give you all the open questions in the world, but if you're not comfortable asking a question, sitting and then not speaking, letting the light bulb sit in the person who's working for you so that you can help to understand them, what motivates them, and then you have to really shape how you develop that relationship with that individual as an individual, not as a textbook, Myers-Briggs persona or profile. It's, these things are tools. They really help. They help particularly with understanding a team dynamic. But leadership for me is about curiosity. And yeah, I'm with you, Al. I've had kind of multiple examples of the formal stuff being in place.
Yeah.
But the kind of micro moments totally diluting the impact. And actually employees forgetting about it, totally, and potentially the stuff that's being delivered is not stuff that they asked for, because nobody's actually asked them what they want. So yeah.
So I'm conscious of time, as always, and I just wondered, and we've kind of touched on it, but I guess the final question, and I'm maybe going to ask both of you, is how do you know when your culture has been transformed? Who would like to go first?
I guess
looking up and down the screen.
I always find questions like this interesting. So that the idea of culture change and taking your culture from one place to another is often done not for the right reasons. It's like, to do this, we need to change the culture. And I think a culture can be something that comes out of change that happens. If you get everybody involved in a project and everybody knows that by upskilling, relearning, by investing more in them, by giving better facilities and stuff, and you add in these things like Pizza Fridays and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you actually invest in them, and from a leadership point of view, if you give time, if you understand who people are, and everybody together all works together to make sure everybody's happy, then your culture will sort of change, but it won't feel like we've went from a culture that was like this and we're now a culture like this. You'll just feel it's just happened, and everybody will be closer, and you'll start to find that the work is a bit easier, people are happier there. You maybe don't start getting as low as these scores, but it can take time. Whereas if you force that culture change, we want to go from this to this, then almost people will say, but that's not the culture that I want. So I think to know it's been transformed, in my opinion, in my experience, is not always as obvious as, we were this and you can now see we're like this. It's more, you now don't have as many problems. Your staff are a bit happier, so the productivity is maybe a bit better. There's maybe more failure going on. It's maybe an excellent example. We're failing 10 times more than we used to, which some people would say, devastation. I was like, no, your staff now feel empowered to fail, which means we have our culture is now fantastic because you're allowing them to do so. So I think look how
innovative the outputs are now versus where they were. I agree. I think one of the other things that I always find quite interesting is if you think at the beginning of any of these change programs that we've all been involved in, it starts with a grievance. It starts because something's not working. Whether that's sales are falling, your staff aren't engaged, your technology stack is fragile, whatever it might be, it starts because something isn't working, and that's not enough to deliver the outcome. It's not enough to deliver the change output. It doesn't translate into will, and that's the most important thing when it comes to your people. Is how do you take that grievance and convert it into the will to want to do something about it? I'm with you, Al. I think that the way that you evolve into a culture that allows you to therefore change whatever that original grievance is often through small groups rather than these big kind of formal town halls or whatever they might be. Small groups of individuals working together in a self-organised way where hierarchy is potentially removed, risk continuing to be managed, but in those self-organising teams, your kind of archaic limiting hierarchies don't exist anymore. And again, in my experience, people convince one another. Your quarterly business updates don't do it. Yeah, listen, you can, and again, coming from a drinks industry background, sales and marketing conferences that are really glitzy, a bit like going to the cinema, definitely get your heart racing. It's great to be part of something exciting, but that's not always the industry that you're working in. So the moment that you get people engaged and turned on is often when they're in these little groups talking to each other, understanding how, well, if I do this and you do that, that equals success. is the bit that's more tangible.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I've been such an advocate right from the get-go. So my background, I did a lot of my kind of leadership understanding an organization called Common Purpose, and we did so much work where it was about getting your hands dirty at the kind of the coal face or at the chalk face or whatever face you want to call it, but down with the guys who are actually interacting with your customers. And it's more often than not, they never get asked, what do you think we need to do? They're told this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the point where you involve them in that conversation and give them some ownership of the solution is the point where you get all of those small pockets of conversations happening, and you get the kind of the groundswell from the bottom up. Now, it needs to be supported from the top down, because it comes back to the very first part of this conversation, Joe, where we were talking about the leaders need to have the mindset, they need to develop the culture, they need to give permission for failure, all of that kind of good stuff, and they need to walk the walk, not just talk it. But if you haven't at the same time gone down to the grassroots of the organization and said, you know what we need to do, so tell us what we need to do and then we'll do it, and get that joining in the middle, you're really going to struggle. And every successful roadmap that I've delivered has been where the top of the organization and the workers, the people who actually deliver the value, are joined up and actually work together to deliver the change. And that's why I always put so much store on the workshops and on getting as many diverse groups and departments involved in those as possible, because you need to have that input to gain that ownership momentum that we always talk about. It's so important. It's so important.
Just back to the question, how do you know when you're there? So I don't think there's necessarily one answer that answers that. But when I've seen change programs evolve into being the new BAU, the new way that companies do things, they are more innovative. That there are more mistakes being made potentially, but genuinely there's commercial return. So their customers are more satisfied. So potentially NPS scores go up because you have empowered and happy employees talking to them. So, that's one which translates into often percentage point increases when you're talking about retention. Again, if you're moving to an empowered culture, then often it's customer first, it's customer centered, rather than being employee centered necessarily, or kind of business centered. So organization led, as in we want to. It's about Mr. Customer, how do you want to? Again, leading often to an increase in new sales, or your innovation roadmap accelerates faster. You're bringing more products to market faster that are relevant because you've tested it before you launch stuff.
Yep.
So your product to launch failure ratio decreases. So there's so many actual tangible KPIs that I think you can place on cultural evolution and change, and that's back to something I said earlier. It doesn't only sit in HR. Potentially the custodianship of how you formally talk about some of this might do, but it's got to be hardwired in the DNA of everything that the business is doing for it to be successful. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, guys, listen, I think we could genuinely carry on this topic for probably the next day or two. Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fab.
Back, and I'm sure we can pick up on some of the themes from this when I play it back. My challenge now is to try and edit this down to a short enough form, but I don't think I will for this one. It's been absolutely fascinating. So, guys, thanks so much for joining us for this week's 3 at 3. And as I say, hopefully we'll get you back next time. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.